Have you ever noticed how some people seem to walk through life like magnets for chaos? They're constantly surrounded by drama, emotional manipulation, and toxic relationships, while others move through the exact same world, the same streets, the same workplaces, the same social circles, yet remain completely invisible to these emotional predators. You've probably looked around, feeling exhausted and emotionally drained, wondering why you always seem to be the target. Why do manipulative people zero in on you? Why does every toxic person in the room somehow find their way to your orbit? If you're watching this, chances are you're tired of feeling like everyone else's emotional dumping ground. You're exhausted from being manipulated, from walking on eggshells, from constantly trying to keep the peace while getting caught in the same destructive patterns over and over again. Maybe you're someone who bends over backward to avoid conflict, who gives endlessly of yourself, who tries to see the good in everyone, only to find yourself trapped in relationships that leave you feeling depleted and questioning your own sanity. Here's what I want you to understand. This isn't about bad luck or fate. Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, discovered something that most people never realize. There's an invisible mechanism at work that determines who becomes a target for toxic people and who doesn't. And it's not what you think. It's not about being stronger, louder, or more aggressive. It's not about learning to fight back or building impenetrable walls around yourself. The real secret is something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful. Toxic people operate like emotional predators. They have an almost supernatural ability to detect the wounds you carry inside, the insecurities, fears, and vulnerabilities that you might not even realize you're broadcasting to the world. They can sense where you're still bleeding emotionally, where you're seeking validation, where you're afraid of rejection or abandonment. That's what makes you visible to them. That's what draws them to you like moths to a flame. The solution isn't to armor yourself against the world or to become cold and distant. The real transformation happens when you do something Jung called integrating your shadow. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations or setting boundaries with others. This is about doing the deep, often uncomfortable work of understanding and accepting the parts of yourself that you've been trying to hide or deny. Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When you truly grasp this concept and apply it to your life, everything changes. You stop projecting your inner wounds onto the world around you. You stop sending out those invisible signals that say, "I'm vulnerable, I need validation, I'm afraid of being alone." And when those signals stop, toxic people simply lose interest. It's not that you become invisible by hiding, you become invisible to them because you no longer have the emotional cracks and openings they need to exploit. The people who seem immune to toxic relationships haven't learned some secret technique for repelling difficult people. They've developed what Jung called psychic integrity. They know who they are, what they want, and what they will and won't tolerate. They're not constantly seeking approval or validation from others because they've found that validation within themselves. They're not afraid of being alone because they've learned to be comfortable with their own company, including the darker aspects of their personality that everyone else tries to suppress. Psychic integrity creates an energy that toxic people can actually feel. They instinctively know that they won't be able to manipulate someone who doesn't need their approval, who isn't afraid of conflict, who won't react to their provocations. These people become like smooth stones that predators can't get their claws into. There's nothing for toxic individuals to grab onto, no weakness to exploit, no desperation to feed off of. But here's what makes this so challenging. The journey to psychic integrity requires you to face the parts of yourself that you've been running from. It means acknowledging that you have your own capacity for darkness, manipulation, and selfishness. It means recognizing that some of what attracts toxic people to you might be your own unconscious patterns and unhealed wounds. This isn't about blaming yourself for other people's bad behavior. It's about understanding that you can't control who the world puts in your path, but you can absolutely control the energy you emit and the signals you send out. The reason you keep attracting the same types of problematic people, even when you change jobs, cities, or social circles, is because you're carrying the same internal patterns with you. You're still seeking the same things from others: validation, approval, a sense of worth, and toxic people are experts at offering these things in exchange for your emotional energy. They promise to give you what you think you need, but the price is always your peace of mind, your self-respect, and your emotional well-being. Jung understood that this pattern would continue until you stopped looking outside yourself for what you needed to find within. When you no longer need others to validate your worth, when you're no longer afraid of being disliked or rejected, when you've made peace with your own flaws and shadow aspects, you become energetically unappealing to those who feed on insecurity and fear. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always comfortable. It requires honest self-examination and the courage to see yourself clearly, including the parts you'd rather ignore. It means asking yourself difficult questions. What am I really seeking from others? What am I afraid they'll discover about me? What parts of myself am I trying to hide or deny? What wounds am I carrying that make me vulnerable to manipulation? The beautiful thing about this process is that as you integrate your shadow and develop genuine self-acceptance, you don't just repel toxic people. You start attracting healthier, more authentic relationships. People who are also doing their own inner work, who don't need to feed off drama or chaos, who can meet you as an equal rather than trying to dominate or control you. Now we come to the part that most people want to avoid, looking inward. It's so much easier to point fingers at the toxic people around us, to label them as narcissists or emotional vampires, to blame them for all our relationship problems. And while these labels might be accurate, they're not the whole story. If it was simply a matter of identifying and avoiding toxic people, you could just cut contact with them and be done with it. But you've probably noticed that the pattern tends to repeat itself. You leave one toxic situation only to find yourself in another one that feels remarkably similar. This is where Jung's concept of projection becomes crucial to understand. Projection is when we take aspects of ourselves that we can't stand to acknowledge, the parts that shame us, frighten us, or contradict our self-perceived pigeon, and we unconsciously attribute them to other people. We see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. The person who drives you crazy with their selfishness might be reflecting back your own unexpressed desire to prioritize your needs. The manipulative colleague who pushes all your buttons might be showing you your own capacity for subtle control that you've never acknowledged. This isn't about blaming yourself for other people's bad behavior. It's about understanding that your intense reactions to certain types of people often reveal something important about your own shadow. When someone triggers you beyond what the situation warrants, when you find yourself obsessing over their behavior or feeling a mix of disgust and fascination, you're likely encountering a projection. That person is carrying something for you, some aspect of humanity that you've decided is unacceptable in yourself. Jung believed that until you reclaim these projections, you'll continue to be at the mercy of them. You'll keep attracting people who embody these shadow qualities because your psyche is trying to force you to confront what you've been avoiding. The angry person who intimidates you might be reflecting your own suppressed rage. The person who seems to get everything handed to them might be showing you your own disowned ambition. The individual who appears to have no boundaries might be mirroring your own struggle with saying no. The process of withdrawing projections requires brutal honesty. You have to be willing to ask yourself, what is this person showing me about myself? This doesn't mean you excuse their behavior or stay in harmful situations. It means you take responsibility for your own emotional reactions and use them as a gateway to self-understanding. When you stop projecting your shadow onto others, you reclaim a tremendous amount of energy that was previously scattered in judgment, resentment, and reactivity. But recognizing projections is only the first step. The next crucial element is learning to starve toxic people of what they need to survive, your emotional reactions. Toxic individuals don't just want your attention, they need your emotional energy. They feed off your fear, anger, frustration, and desperate attempts to make them understand. Every time you try to reason with someone who doesn't want to be reasonable, every time you defend yourself against baseless accusations, every time you lose your composure in response to their provocations, you're giving them exactly what they want. There's a dance that happens in these interactions. They provoke, you react. They throw out emotional bait, a criticism, a subtle insult, a passive-aggressive comment, and wait to see if you'll bite. When you do, when you get upset or try to defend yourself, they've won. It doesn't matter if you're right or if your reaction is justified. The moment you lose your emotional equilibrium, they've succeeded in controlling you. This is why learning to remain neutral in the face of provocation is so powerful. Neutrality doesn't mean becoming a doormat or passively accepting mistreatment. It means refusing to engage in the emotional game. It means observing their behavior without feeling compelled to react to it. When you respond to manipulation with calm detachment, when you don't take their bait, when you remain centered regardless of their tactics, you remove their power over you. Toxic people cannot stand this kind of response. They're used to getting reactions, to pushing people's buttons, to creating chaos and drama. When they encounter someone who won't play their game, who doesn't need their approval or fear their disapproval, they quickly lose interest. You become boring to them because you're not feeding their need for drama and emotional intensity. But maintaining this neutrality requires something deeper than just controlling your reactions. It requires developing what Jung would call internal boundaries, a solid sense of self that doesn't depend on others' opinions or approval. External boundaries are about what you will and won't tolerate from others. Internal boundaries are about what you will and won't accept from yourself in terms of your own emotional responses and needs. Most people who struggle with toxic relationships have very porous internal boundaries. They need others to validate their worth, to approve of their choices, to make them feel secure and loved. These needs create vulnerabilities that manipulative people can exploit. They'll offer conditional approval, threaten to withdraw affection, or create emotional instability to keep you off balance and dependent on them. Internal boundaries mean knowing at a deep level that you don't need anyone else's approval to exist. It means having absolute clarity about your values, your worth, and your non-negotiables. It means being willing to lose relationships, opportunities, or social standing rather than compromise your integrity. This isn't about being rigid or inflexible. It's about having such a solid sense of self that you can navigate relationships from a place of choice rather than desperation. The deepest level of this work involves what Jung considered the most challenging aspect of psychological development: integrating your shadow. Your shadow consists of all the aspects of yourself that you've deemed unacceptable. Every impulse you've suppressed, every thought you've judged, every emotion you've tried to deny becomes part of your personal shadow. The more you try to maintain an image of yourself as purely good, kind, and altruistic, the larger your shadow grows. Here's the paradox. The more you deny your own capacity for darkness, the more vulnerable you become to those who embody it. If you can't acknowledge your own anger, you'll be controlled by angry people. If you can't accept your own selfishness, you'll be manipulated by selfish people. If you can't recognize your own need for power and control, you'll be dominated by those who openly wield these qualities. Integrating your shadow doesn't mean acting on every dark impulse or becoming a cruel person. It means acknowledging that you have the capacity for cruelty, selfishness, manipulation, and destruction, and choosing not to act on these impulses. It means recognizing that you contain the full spectrum of human experience, light and dark, good and evil, generous and selfish. When you can accept these aspects of yourself without judgment, you become psychologically whole. This wholeness creates a kind of energetic immunity to toxic people. They can no longer use your fears, shame, or need for approval against you because you've already faced and accepted these aspects of yourself. You no longer need to hide who you are or maintain a false image of perfection. This authenticity and self-acceptance create a presence that naturally repels those who feed on insecurity and fear, while attracting others who are also committed to growth and truth. The ultimate goal isn't just to avoid toxic people. It's to become so aligned with your authentic self that you naturally attract healthy, supportive relationships while remaining uninteresting to those who would exploit your vulnerabilities. This is the true meaning of psychological freedom, and it's available to anyone willing to do the deep work of self-integration and shadow work that Jung pioneered.